A word to describe Donald Trump, one that wouldn't immediately spring to mind, is ordinary. Yet Dr. Trevor McCrisken, who is the Associate Professor of US Politics and Foreign Policy at the University of Warwick, is the lead author of the forthcoming volume, The Ordinary Presidency of Donald J. Trump. He joins me now. What do you mean by ordinary?
Well, we don't mean that Donald Trump is an ordinary individual or an ordinary president. He is without doubt an extraordinary individual who has taken the president, been president in ways that perhaps no other president has ever been, and all the bluster and everything that you get from him. What we're arguing is, though, that the outcomes, the achievements that he's having are much more limited, much more mediocre than he suggests that they are. They're far from being extraordinary. They're very much in line with previous Republican Party positions that have been taken on various issues. And so his presidency is turning out to be ordinary. He's an extraordinary individual, but the outcomes are quite ordinary.
I mean, summits with the North Koreans, they're not ordinary.
Well, no, they're not. And obviously, any presidency is going to have things happening within it which are different from previous presidencies. But the difficulty that he's having with those engagements with North Korea are not dissimilar to difficulties that other presidents have had in previous encounters with North Korea, trying to resolve the issue of the nuclearization of the Koreas, is something that many presidents have engaged in, many presidencies have approached, and have found themselves kicked back each time. They think they get an agreement, and actually there's no concrete kind of movement to denuclearization.
And isn't his style, I mean, North Korea is one example, another is building the wall, his style of direct presidential intervention in foreign affairs. I mean, that's something pretty out of the ordinary for a president, isn't it, without listening to your advisors?
Yeah, again, his approach is very extraordinary. We're certainly not saying that, but I think the degree to which there's kickback against him, that the system is working, Congress is
checks and balances,
checks and balances are there. They're still operating in ways that are very effective, and he's having to roll back on many of the promises that he made on the campaign. He hasn't got a wall. He declares a national emergency because he's desperate. He has no other place to go. But then the courts kick in and say you can't actually declare a national emergency over this. You can't take money away from other programs that it's already been promised.
What about the argument that he's actually subverted the institution of presidency, not releasing his tax returns, appointing his family to senior offices? I think he's got the highest rate of sacking White House appointees and all the rest of it. So unlike previous presidents, he's actually trashing the notion of the presidency.
And to a large extent, that's making life even more difficult for him. So his extraordinary approach to being president means that his presidency is achieving a lot less than perhaps it would do. It's very necessary for a president to engage positively with Congress, to try to garner as much public opinion behind him as he can for the positions he takes, and also very carefully work within the executive branch to deliver a presidency which, if it is going to take forward extraordinary measures, is going to have to all work together. Because he's been, selecting people sometimes based on just what they look like, or how they might be on television, rather than what their expertise level might be, he's actually made life much more difficult for himself. And it's often the case that someone who runs as an outsider then really struggles once they get to Washington, because they have to play the game. He doesn't want to play that game, but it's making the outcomes far less effective than they could be.
Is the policy conclusion then that, as far as we're concerned, we should just calm down and have sort of normal relations with the Americans?
Well, I think we've got to be very careful, because obviously he is incredibly unpredictable as an individual. What we're not saying is that this is nothing we should worry about. This is not a potentially dangerous president, but that we should recognise that the checks and balances within the domestic system are still there, and that actually the kind of international infrastructure of diplomacy, etc., is still working. Other nations are still engaging with each other in cooperative, collaborative ways, no matter what the president himself might be saying, and that many of his advisors actually track back from the positions that he takes, even on foreign policy issues, and try to work more carefully with their sort of traditional allies, and maybe be a bit more wary of traditional adversaries than the president has been.
Well, I'm just seeing a poll in from Quinnipiac University. Do you think Trump committed crimes while in office? Yes, 45%. No, 43%. Thank you very much indeed, Dr. Trevor McCrisken there. This is All Out Politics.